And joining me now is NBC News chief international analyst and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, Admiral James Stavridis, NBC News international affairs analyst and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, and Politico's White House bureau chief and way too early host, Jonathan Lemire. Thanks to all of you. Jonathan Lemire, let's talk about Israel. And it's going to survive without the additional supplemental funds. They have arms supplies. They've got stock loads. But Ukraine, in the judgment of most of the people I talked to in Europe this week, will not, if they don't get the help. The specific weapons the U.S. has, the Patriots air defenses, the long-range missiles. I was in Munich, as you saw, traveling with this bipartisan congressional delegation. It was clear there is broad support for Ukraine, bipartisan majorities on both floors, if it could get to the House floor. They seem to feel, in talking to Hakeem Jeffries and others, but they're in the minority, that there are ways to work around the speaker, give him some political cover, perhaps, from his MAGA opponents. Can you figure this one out?
It's going to be a challenge. You're certainly right that these two countries, Israel and Ukraine, are in very different places right now. In fact, in terms of Israel, there's a lot of tension right now between the West Wing and how Prime Minister Netanyahu is conducting that war, and all eyes are on what happens in Rafah in the coming days. But setting that aside for now, for the matter of Ukraine, I have heard, as you, there was certainly some optimism out of Munich, but that we need to keep in mind that's a pretty self-selective group there. People who attended that conference, for the most part, are people inclined to help Ukraine. I think it is also true that a majority of both parties do want to help. And though not a given, there is a sense that if the bill was taken to the floor for a vote, it would pass. But the issue is, will Speaker Johnson do so? To this point, he's saying no. He's saying absolutely not, that he feels he's leaning on the idea that more needs to be done for border security, when, of course, it was Republicans who killed the border security bill in the first place that was tied with the Ukraine aid. There is the discharge petition, which is sort of a difficult and complex way to get around the speaker. I think Leader Jeffries has been considering that. It does feel like all options are on the table because, as we know, Andrea, Kyiv is running out of time and they're running out of ammunition. Russia won a battle over the weekend, their first victory there in nearly a year. There's a sense that Putin truly has momentum. And now, after Alexei Navalny's death, as the vice president spoke about, echoing what we heard from President Biden in recent days as well, saying this is what Putin does. He reigns by terror. He kills people of other nations and he kills his own citizens. And the only way to stop him is to help Ukraine, and urging these lawmakers to pass that supplemental.
And Admiral, we're approaching the 2-year mark of this full-scale Russian invasion. Last year at Munich, there were celebrations. It looked as though Russia was on its back heels. Russia has suffered grievously, 360,000 plus casualties. They've lost, hundreds of tanks, armored vehicles. But right now, it feels like an inflection point, because this is the first big retreat, this weekend. And they say that they are running out of ammo. Their troops have good morale, better morale than the Russians, but they're in these trenches. And Zelensky told the congressional delegation that these troops are in their trenches, on their cell phones, in the mud, without ammo, rationing their ammo, tracking the stalemate on the Hill, on the house, in getting them the aid that they need.
Yeah, it's a shocking moment for the United States of America to not do the right thing. And frankly, in the big scheme of our budget, this is a very small amount of money, but it means everything, not only to the Ukrainians, but to the cause of freedom in Europe. For $60 billion, you could keep that Ukrainian war machine running another year or two. And by the way, our European allies have stood and delivered almost that amount, $55 billion already coming from the European Union. So this is the moment for the United States. And militarily, it is a dangerous moment. I think the Ukrainians will hold, but if we can't provide them the means to do so, not only the artillery, but the long-range ATACMS, which could be used to strike behind the Russian lines, that may be the most important thing that we could do to blunt their advance. And then finally, Andrea, don't forget about the civilians in Ukraine. The reason Putin hasn't pounded that country into dust the way he did in Syria is because of air defense weapons from the West. that's another shortfall that is coming due very rapidly. So it's artillery, it's long-range missiles to reach Crimea, it's air defense weapons to protect the civilians. Now is the moment. Any sensible observer would be calling on the U.S. Congress to do whatever is needed to get this aid to Ukraine.
And Ambassador, I haven't seen you, so condolences to you. The loss of Alexei Navalny, it was a personal loss. You're a good friend, friends with the family. And it was quite an electrifying moment when his wife just, within hours of this terrible announcement, shocking announcement, came out on the stage in Munich and, galvanized the whole conference. Now, today she was on his YouTube channel and indicating she's ready to take the torch and continue his work. Talk to me about the significance of that.
Well, it's obviously the thing she has to do. I saw her the day before her husband was killed in Munich. I was there with you, Andrea, when she spoke to the group. It was electrifying. You saw how strong she is. She's the obvious candidate to lead this charge. But if she were on this show with us right now, you know what she'd be talking about? She'd be talking about what you all just were talking about, this aid bill to Ukraine. Putin is a killer. Putin killed her husband, and every day he is killing people on the Ukrainian battlefield. And if we want to stop that, if we want to fight evil, that's the word she would use, you have to do something, and it's hard for her. She doesn't know what to do, but members of Congress have something right in front of them that they can do. It's right there. They can help stop the killing of Putin's war machine. And I, too, met with members of Congress in Munich. And again, they are self-selected, like Jonathan said. But this is a moment. This is a historic moment. If they don't pass this, historians will write about them like the American firsters in 1940, who said, oh, aid to Great Britain won't matter. This is not our war. They look very bad in retrospect in that position. And I think they have to take the initiative now. And I have one concrete solution, Andrea. I'm going to reveal it here on your show right now. They need cover, just like you said. Speaker Johnson needs some cover. He just can't roll over. Here's an idea. There's something called the Repo Act that is passed out of with overwhelming majorities from both the Senate and the Houses. It basically takes the frozen Russian assets that we have and it gives it to the Ukrainians. Sponsored by Senator Risch, Republican, and Congressman McFaul, Republican in the House. Marry that to this bill. And then Speaker Johnson can say to the people sitting behind Jonathan, where he is right now, I know them, they're not all thrilled about this. There's a debate within the Biden administration as to whether this is a good idea. I think it's the right idea. Put them together, and then Speaker Johnson and his colleagues can say, we forced the Biden administration to give over these billions of dollars of Russian assets. It's a win-win, and it's right before them. They could do it right now.
And in fact, I was going to ask you about that because I was talking to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and he was suggesting that very thing. So were Republicans. Lindsey Graham would go a step farther, and I think so would Whitehouse. I talked to him about this, designated Russia as a state sponsor of terror. Do to them what we do to Iran and North Korea and Cuba, without real justification there, in terms of the real standard for that. But Putin is obviously a killer. There's no question about that. And there's bipartisan support for it, certainly in the Senate, I believe in the House as well. And there's talk about it. I would tell you, from what I can tell, that the Secretary of State would support it. There is also support. Brussels is against it because they hold a lot of the Russian debt. Japan is apparently against it, so are the Swiss. So do it individually. It should be a subject for the G7. What's wrong with that, Ambassador?
So I want to separate out the Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism from taking the assets, because I've written about both. I've talked to our administration about both. I think getting the money is easier than a state sponsor of terrorism, even though I personally support both of those. I run a sanctions group, and we wrote a paper in October of 2022 about how to transfer these assets, right? A year and a half ago. And having met with many people in Brussels, in Europe, you're exactly right on your analysis that they are less enthusiastic. But that's exactly why members of Congress should do it. Because if they compelled the administration to do this in a joint package, that would make it easier for those who support the idea in Europe to go along. I just literally yesterday met with people that said if America moved first, if America showed leadership, it would make it easier for them to do it. So this, to me, is just a win-win, and it has such a obvious logic to it. And just symbolically, I want to say one last thing. I met with wounded warriors in Munich as well from Ukraine, some of whom had lost their sons and other friends. Symbolically, for them to pass this will mean so much to those soldiers sitting in the trenches. They need that signal. Just the symbolic signal that we are not abandoning them is vitally important for them to keep fighting their war. So they've got to get this done. History will not be kind to them if they block this. Every day they block this, this is a gift to Vladimir Putin. Why, as an American, do you want to be giving Mr. Putin a gift at this moment in history?
And Admiral Stavridis, let me ask you just briefly about the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a very hardline speech again on Saturday in a news conference and is determined to go into Rafah. He said that those who would say don't go into Rafah want us to lose the war. I'm paraphrasing. Basically, those are Joe Biden and the United States administration, which has been so supportive while Europe and the UN and everyone else is not and stuck with Netanyahu. So where do you stand now as Israel is saying that they will go into Rafah by March 10th, the start of Ramadan, if they don't get the hostages out? Whereas everyone else is saying you got to get the hostage deal and then you can get a pause in the fighting and do it before Ramadan so that the war doesn't spread.
Yeah, first of all, to say that counseling Israel not to launch a massive attack into Rafah is like telling them to lose the war is nonsense. It's disingenuous and it's militarily totally wrong. What we ought to be continuing to tell the Israelis is you are losing the narrative. You're losing the global war in terms of how you are viewed because of the massive disproportionality between the numbers of civilians killed at this point, half of whom are children. This is a moment when Israel has to pull back on the military lever and lean forward with the diplomatic lever. And I really applaud Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan for the work they've consistently done to try and move this forward, both on the hostage point you made, the humanitarian piece here, and the bigger geopolitical action, which would be to get the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia aligned with the Israelis and working together with the Arab world. Those long-term solutions then move you in a very nascent way toward a two-state solution. That's a big, complicated picture, but I can assure you if Israel simply rolls into Rafah, it will be a diplomatic, political disaster for them, and it will compound the military challenges ahead, not solve them.
Admiral James Stavridis, Ambassador Mike McFaul, Jonathan Lemire, up way too early and then some today. Thank you.